right here. EU ambassador to the U.S. and former Irish Prime Minister John Bruton has been a vocal critic of U.S. policy. He joins us here right now in our studio. Welcome, Ambassador.
Morning.
Let us talk about President Obama. You're disappointed with the efforts that he has made thus far, and he's meeting a lot of resistance in Congress where health care and the financial services regulations seem to be higher priorities than capping carbon emissions. Is your concern because you do not believe that the world can really accomplish anything real in terms of climate change without the U.S. taking a leadership position?
I believe the world cannot accomplish anything without the U.S. taking a leadership position. I'm not disappointed with President Obama's attempts to pass legislation. I was disappointed when I heard that the Senate didn't expect that it could pass any legislation until sometime next year, by which time the delegates will have gone home from the international meeting in Copenhagen where we're supposed to reach a deal. So my concern is to ensure that we have US legislation well advanced before Copenhagen so that we can get a deal in Copenhagen with the US leadership.
Is that in reference to the majority leader of the Senate, Harry Reid, saying we're just going to have a busy, busy year?
Yes.
Okay.
Are you, though, at all encouraged by what we've seen from the administration in recent days, the Environmental Protection Agency moving to require power plants to submit for permits, and they would have to install the newest technology in order to obtain permits to expand or build a new plant, for example, and also an effective moratorium on mountaintop blasting, one of the key ways to extract coal, which is the biggest source of carbon emissions here in the United States?
I am very encouraged by the announcements that the EPA has made in recent days on those topics. I'm also very encouraged at the fact that the Senate now has legislation before it produced by Senators Boxer and Kerry, which it did not have at the point of my original criticism. And that legislation, I hope, will be accelerated or fast-tracked in the Senate so that President Obama, or whoever he sends to Copenhagen, will be able to give the leadership that the world is hoping for from the United States.
Is one of the goals, should be one of the goals for the Kyoto Protocol? I mean, you've referenced it sort of as the right idea, but maybe a little bit clumsy. I mean, could the U.S. reconsider participating after its failure the first time around?
Oh, I think so. I mean, the idea of is that the United States will participate in the next protocol, the next agreement on limitations. The present one runs out anyway. That's why there's an urgency in Copenhagen. So for the rest of the world, they need to agree on a renewal of the Kyoto Protocol or a new protocol. But this time we want the United States to be a full participant because this is a global problem, and the U.S. emits 25% of the greenhouse gas emissions, and you cannot solve the global problem really without the United States.
Ambassador, let's try and put this in a bit more of a global context. In the wake of the G20 and the meetings that were held at the UN here that week on climate change, people seem to be patting themselves on the back a little bit. The right tone was expressed, and there was an easing, let's say, in China's position. But is anything really being done there? It seems that these are all somewhat vague long-term commitments. We're not hearing anything specific from China, and nobody is setting really ambitious short-term targets.
Well, I suppose these sorts of gatherings are part of an elaborate dance, and the dance is dancing towards a final agreement in Copenhagen, I hope. If that's the case, I'm perfectly happy with what's happening. If, on the other hand, we're not going to have an agreement in Copenhagen, then I think we face a really, really serious situation.
Do we have to wait for Copenhagen to find out if, in fact, this elaborate dance that you describe is really just an elaborate dance or more? Or do you anticipate that we will hear something more substantive from the big carbon emitters between now and then?
Well, I think we've heard something very substantive from China at the United Nations. We've now heard something substantive from the United States with the legislation produced and the EPA decisions. The question now is, can we advance it still further so that by the time we reach Copenhagen in December, we have the ingredients in place to make the final deal then, to bring the dance to an end in Copenhagen rather than prolong it exhaustingly into next year and the year after.
Ambassador, very briefly, what's your position on cap and trade? A lot of people say that we aren't going to be able to reduce carbon emissions effectively without a trading policy or framework in place. Do you believe it's essential?
Well, you have two options, carbon tax or cap and trade. And cap and trade is more direct, more efficient in many ways in getting the reductions, and we worked that in the European Union with success. We had some initial difficulties in the beginning when we introduced it, but now it's working very well, and we hope the rest of the world will adopt it too.
Ambassador, thank you very much for joining us. Ambassador John Bruton.
Thank you.
He's the former Irish Prime Minister, and he is the EU's ambassador to the U.S.